The ground vibrated, not with thunder, but with a low hum that seemed to emanate from the very bedrock beneath our feet, a resonance that spoke of something ancient and immense awakening after millennia of slumber. We were deep within the heart of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, or so the textbooks claimed. Our team, a motley crew of seasoned archaeologists and wide-eyed graduate students, had been excavating a newly discovered tell just outside the ancient city of for months. The Iraqi heat was relentless, the dust pervasive, but the potential rewards, a glimpse into the dawn of recorded history, kept us digging. Professor Armitage, our lead archaeologist, a man whose beard seemed to hold more wisdom than most living scholars, had a hunch about this particular site. Unlike other Sumerian settlements, this tell exhibited anomalies in its layout and construction. The outer walls, though eroded by time, showed signs of a strange, almost crystalline material embedded within the mud bricks, a substance we couldn't readily identify. Local Bedouin tribesmen whispered tales of sky chariots and luminous beings associated with this forgotten mound, stories we'd initially dismissed as folklore born of desert nights and vivid imaginations. But as we delved deeper, the whispers began to take on a disquieting resonance. We unearthed tablets inscribed with cuneiform unlike any we had seen before, glyphs that seemed to depict celestial events with an almost astronomical precision, far exceeding the known capabilities of the Sumerian civilization. One tablet, in particular, showed figures with elongated heads and large obsidian eyes interacting with what could only be described as flying machines, their shapes defying any earthly aircraft of that era. Skepticism warred with a growing sense of awe and unease within our camp. Was it possible that the myths held a kernel of truth? Could the Sumerians, the inventors of writing, mathematics, and law, have also possessed knowledge or interacted with entities far beyond our current understanding of their time? The air grew heavy with unspoken questions, each unearthed artifact deepening the enigma. Even Professor Armitage, a man of science and reason, began to look at the star-strewn desert sky with a newfound intensity. The breakthrough came from Dr. Aris Thorne, our brilliant but eccentric linguist, who had been working tirelessly on the anomalous tablets. One sweltering afternoon, he stumbled out of his tent, his face pale beneath his sun-weathered skin, clutching a translation that would shatter our understanding of the past. The cuneiform didn't describe gods in the traditional sense. It didn't speak of divine whims or celestial battles. It read more like a logbook, a technical manual. It detailed star systems far beyond our own, with planets described in such precise detail, their mass, their atmosphere, their orbital periods, that it defied all possibility. The beings it mentioned, the Anunnaki, were not presented as deities to be worshipped, but as benefactors, engineers, and perhaps creators. The tablets spoke of a reseeding of the planet after a great cataclysm, of manipulating the essence of life to create a new breed of being, a worker race, designed to toil in their mines. United States. The word humanity wasn't used, but the implication hung in the silent, oppressive air of the tent. Simultaneously, our geological team finally managed to analyze a fragment of the crystalline material from the walls. The results came back nonsensical. It was a silicon-based lattice, structured with a perfection that couldn't occur in nature, and it exhibited strange piezoelectric properties, generating a minute electrical charge when put under pressure. It was, for all intents and purposes, a prehistoric circuit board. The whispers of the Bedouins no longer seemed like folklore. The most chilling discovery, however, came when Aris cross-referenced the star charts on the tablets with the architectural layout of the tell. He found a passage that spoke of a heart-of-the-sky chariot, a power source buried deep within the earth to await their return. Following the coordinates and angles laid out in the ancient text, We brought in the ground-penetrating radar. We watched the monitor as the signal pulsed into the earth, revealing layers of sand and stone, the history of millennia. And then, 20 meters below the lowest level of Sumerian settlement, it appeared. A shape, unmistakably artificial, impossibly old. It was a perfect disk, over 100 meters in diameter, made of a material so dense the radar could not fully penetrate it. We weren't excavating a city. We were excavating its hangar. The discovery of the disk changed everything. Scientific protocol was thrown to the wind. The find was too monumental to be contained by careful brushstrokes and patient cataloging. Professor Armitage, a man who had dedicated his life to the meticulous unearthing of the past, gave the order to bring in heavy machinery. It felt like a sacrilege, tearing through layers of history with such brute force, but what lay beneath was not history as we knew it. It was something else entirely. The local workers, who had been with us for months, suddenly refused to enter the pit. They spoke of a curse, of disturbing the sky gods who slept beneath the sands. We dismissed their fears, driven by a feverish need to see, to touch, to know. As the excavators clawed away the final meters of compacted earth, the air grew thin, charged with a palpable static that made the hairs on our arms stand on end. Then, the sound. A deep, resonant clang that vibrated through the steel arm of the machine and into our very bones. We had reached it. We descended into the pit, a hushed reverence falling over our team. The surface of the disk was exposed, a vast, dark, circular expanse, as smooth as polished obsidian and utterly seamless. There were no joints, no rivets, no panels. It was as if it had been forged from a single, impossible molecule. And as the desert sun hit its surface, we saw them. Etched into the material were symbols that were not cuneiform, not hieroglyphs, not anything from any known human culture. They were elegant, complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of our vision. They pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, like sleeping stars. It was Eris who moved first. He was entranced, muttering passages from the tablets under his breath. He recognized one of the star-like patterns from the texts, the one they called the Key of Enki. Compelled by a force none of us understood, he reached out and pressed his palm flat against the glowing glyph. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The low hum we had felt before returned, but 100 times stronger, shaking the very ground we stood on. Above us, at the surface of the tell, every one of the crystalline bricks embedded in the Sumerian ruins began to glow with a brilliant blue light, turning the entire archaeological site into a massive, earthbound constellation. The metallic surface before us didn't open. It retracted. It flowed like liquid mercury, spiraling into itself, to reveal a circular aperture leading into the heart of the craft. From within poured not darkness, but a column of pure, white light that pulsed with a life of its own. It wasn't blinding. It was inviting. As we stared, paralyzed, the light reached out to us, and our minds were torn open. It wasn't a sound or a vision, but a direct download of information. We saw the Earth as a primordial, volcanic sphere. We saw colossal ships, miles long, silhouetted against the swirling dust of the Orion Nebula. We witnessed the careful, deliberate stitching of genetic code, the birth of our species not from mud and clay, but in a laboratory of cosmic scale. We felt their loneliness, their vast intellect, their purpose. We had not been created in the image of gods. We had been engineered. And in that blinding, terrifying moment of clarity, we understood that the Anunnaki were not just our past. The tablets had made a promise. They were also our future. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The column of light retracted, the impossible aperture spiraled shut, and the deep hum faded into the desert wind, leaving a silence more profound than any we had ever known. We stood in the darkness of the pit, our minds screaming with the echoes of 1 billion years of history. Professor Armitage was still on his knees, his face buried in his hands, muttering about the Epic of Gilgamesh, not as a myth, but as a fragmented biography. Eris simply stared up at the night sky, as if searching for a familiar constellation that was no longer there. We were left with a truth we could never share, a revelation that would be dismissed as madness. The evidence? The craft beneath our feet was once again inert, a silent, seamless mystery. The crystals in the walls above were just dull stones again. All we had was the shared memory, a mental scar burned into our consciousness. We had sought the cradle of our civilization, hoping to find the first kings, the first laws, the first gods. Instead, we found our architect's abandoned workshop. We now know that the Sumerian tales of gods descending from the heavens were not allegory, they were observation. But this knowledge brings no comfort, only a cold, creeping dread. The tablets were clear on one final point. Their departure was not an abandonment. It was a temporary leave. They promised to return when the celestial markers were once again aligned. We unearthed the greatest secret in human history, only to realize it was not the end of a story, but the prologue to a final chapter we may not survive. And so we are left to watch the stars, just as the Sumerians did, and ask the same terrifying question. When our creators return, will they look upon what we have become with pride or with profound disappointment?